Oh, so now you're above the rules. That's what she snapped at me the first time I said I wasn't paying her made-up $25 trash fine. Her lips pressed tight, clipboard clutched against her chest like it was a badge. The way she puffed herself up, you'd think she was the sheriff of the cul-de-sac. But she was. She was just Melanie Pierce, my neighbor, self-appointed queen of the block. The morning was quiet by the lake, just the sound of a soft breeze rattling the lid of my trash bin. I'd stepped outside with a mug of coffee, boots scuffing against the gravel, when I saw her orange ticket plastered across the handle, bright as a warning flare. It screamed violation in block letters. For a second, I froze there in my driveway, wallet halfway out of my back pocket, ready to just pay the stupid thing. It would have been easier, quicker, keep the peace. But something in me hesitated. The fine wasn't about the money. $25 wouldn't break me. It was the principle, the arrogance behind it. My job as a records specialist had trained me to read between the lines of property documents, deeds, contracts. And something about this whole fine felt wrong. Before I could even peel the slip off the bin, I heard it, 3 sharp knocks on my front door. Not polite ones. Hard debt collector knocks. My stomach sank, and when I opened the door, there she was, Melanie, early 50s, eyes sharp as pins, voice rehearsed for authority. Good morning, Evan. I'm here about your compliance with our community standards. She said it like she was announcing a court order. My eyes flicked past her to the wooden fence by the road where I'd hung a new placard just the day before. Big, reflective letters. Couldn't miss it if you tried. It read, not in HOA. That sign you put up is making the whole neighborhood look bad, she said, chin tilted high, finger stabbing toward it. I sipped the last of my coffee and let her words hang in the morning air. Unified appearance sounds nice, I told her, maybe with a little more sarcasm than I meant. But the law doesn't say anything about pretty. Her jaw tightened. She wasn't used to pushback. That clipboard in her hands looked thick with violation notices, her knuckles white around it like it gave her authority over everyone on the street. Do you realize this lot is completely beyond your HOA's scope? I asked finally, my patience thinning. I pointed to the marker on the fence. Lot number 7849, that's county designation. My trash service contract was signed 3 years before your HOA even existed. I never joined. I never agreed to be part of it. Her eyes flickered when I pulled out the folder I kept near the door. Original contract, dated and stamped. Most people in her path probably folded instantly, paid up and shut their doors. But not me. My work had taught me to keep every paper in order for situations exactly like this. You see, Melanie, jurisdiction isn't just a suggestion. It's a legal boundary, I said, keeping my tone even. For the first time, she looked rattled. She shifted the clipboard to her other hand, exhaled sharply, then declared, Our policies apply to the entire neighborhood area. Her free hand swept out toward the lake and every house in sight, as if she were some monarch staking her claim. The words cut through me. She believed it. She really thought her HOA's reach extended over homes that never signed on. Inside, my chest tightened. Outwardly, I tried to keep calm, but I knew this was bigger than a $25 ticket. This was someone trying to step into legal territory they had no right to touch. She turned on her heel and marched back to her car, heels crunching against the gravel, posture stiff with indignation. I watched her go, still clutching the orange slip in my hand. The morning breeze stirred, rattling my metal sign against the fence like it was backing me up. That's when the weight of it really hit me. I wasn't just dealing with an annoying neighbor. I was dealing with someone claiming power they didn't actually have. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and dialed 311. My fingers shook so much I fumbled the number twice. The operator transferred me to a county rep, and I explained the whole mess, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to know, I said, if an HOA can find a property that's not actually in their association. The silence on the other end was long enough to make my pulse race. I stared out the window at the lake, the reflection of morning sun rippling across the water, and held my breath while I waited. Finally, the rep's voice came back, calm and steady. Sir, your property is outside HOA boundaries. They have 0 standing to charge you. I swear my knees nearly gave out. It felt like someone had lifted a weight off my shoulders I didn't realize I'd been carrying for weeks. It was never about $25. It was about control, about someone trying to police me without authority. I leaned against the porch railing, phone still pressed to my ear, staring out at the water. For the first time since this started, I felt free. And maybe, just maybe, I started to look forward to seeing what would happen when their bluff was finally called. "You okay over there?" Her voice startled me. I was still frozen in the driveway, phone pressed to my ear long after the county rep had hung up. It was Rebecca Shaw, my neighbor to the right. She was rolling her trash bin back up the slope, her accountant's posture straight and efficient, like someone who'd done this routine 1,000 times. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost, standing there clutching my phone like it was glued to my hand. "Everything's fine," I called back, though my voice cracked. Then, without really thinking, I waved her over. I needed someone to hear this besides me. I told her what the county had just confirmed. My lot wasn't in the HOA. Their fine had no teeth. She frowned, the kind of frown accountants get when numbers don't add up. "Hold on," she said, and disappeared inside her house. A minute later, I could hear drawers opening, papers shifting. She came back with a spreadsheet in one hand, a notepad in the other. "I've been looking into their rebate claims," she admitted, spreading the pages across my porch table like a detective laying out evidence. She pointed with her pen at a column labeled quarterly tonnage rebates. "If your property and others like it are excluded, their numbers fall apart. They lose money, a lot of it." I felt a chill. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't even about appearances. It was about cash, fraud. The lake breeze carried a damp smell of algae as we sat there cross-referencing her figures with my trash contract. The sun dropped slowly, slanting long shadows across the boards of my porch. Every number Rebecca circled made my stomach sink further. This wasn't a clerical mistake. It was systematic, deliberate. And suddenly, the orange violation slip on my trash bin looked less like a ticket and more like a weapon. By midweek, the whispers started. Not direct confrontations, just little comments, casual but sharp enough to sting. "The woman 3 houses down," Rebecca told me one afternoon, "asked if you were really trying to cause trouble for the community." The next day, as I checked my mailbox, a man walking his dog slowed down, offered a polite smile, then added, "Hope everything works out with your neighborhood situation." His tone was neutral, but his eyes said he'd already heard a different version of the story. It didn't take a genius to see what was happening. Meline was talking. Someone was shaping a narrative behind closed doors, and I was being painted as the troublemaker. Then came the second tag. This one wasn't orange, it was bright pink, slapped right across my trash can, a new violation. But the lot number printed on it, completely different. I laughed at first, an actual belly laugh that startled even me, but the humor didn't last. The more I looked at it, the colder I felt, because now it was obvious. This wasn't a mistake. This was strategy. If they kept slapping random lot numbers on my property, they could blur the trail, confuse records, make it look messy in case it ever went to court. I peeled the pink slip off and placed it beside the orange one. Side by side, 2 bold errors, both wrong, both stamped with false authority. I took a black marker and wrote the date on each slip. Then I taped them to a sheet of paper in my garage. Documentation. That's what my training had taught me, always document. I photographed each tag from 3 angles, noted the weather, the time of day, even the dust pattern on the lid of the bin. By Friday, I had 3 tags total, 3 different lot numbers, 3 attempts to claim jurisdiction they didn't have. That was enough for me to call the non-emergency sheriff's line. My voice trembled at first, but the dispatcher listened carefully, didn't brush it off. "That's harassment," she said. "You're right to report it." I hung up feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because someone official had acknowledged this wasn't all in my head. Heavier because the fight was no longer neighborly, it was legal now. Rebecca came over again that evening. She laid fresh calculations on the table, eyes narrowing as she explained. "If they're tagging you like this, it isn't about compliance. It's about pressure. They're trying to force you into their numbers because they can't afford to lose you." We both laughed nervously when I compared the tags to discount coupons, only missing the promo codes. But the humor rang hollow. The truth was clear. This was harassment, systematic and deliberate. That night I sat on the porch alone, the crickets humming, the faint slap of water against the shore carrying across the lake. My sign, not in HOA, gleamed faintly in the moonlight. I thought about the neighbors who had started to look at me differently, the whispers growing louder, the pressure mounting. And I wondered just how far Melanie and her board would go once they realized I wasn't going to bend. Because sometimes desperate people don't back down, they escalate. And I had the sinking feeling this was only the beginning. The patrol car showed up just after sunrise. I was already outside, coffee mug in hand, watching the mist curl off the lake. The crunch of tires on gravel made my chest tighten. This wasn't a siren blaring, lights flashing arrival. It was calm, deliberate, a county cruiser easing to a stop right at the curb in front of my house. Deputy Lucas Blake stepped out, tall, steady, the kind of presence that quiets a street before he even speaks. His sunglasses caught the morning sun as he adjusted the brim of his hat and gave me a nod. He looked like a man who dealt with this kind of nonsense before. "You the one with the HOA dispute?" he asked, voice even. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how dry my throat was. "That's me." He didn't waste time. We walked to my porch table where I'd laid out the slips like evidence in a case file. Orange, pink, yellow, different lot numbers, each one photographed, documented, time-stamped. My hands shook as I slid the papers across, but his calm steadied me. He flipped through them like a teacher grading a sloppy assignment. "Good record-keeping," he muttered, then louder. "Let's establish some clear legal boundaries so there's no confusion." Hearing that made something in my chest loosen. For weeks, I'd been second-guessing myself. But now, someone in uniform with real authority was telling me my documentation mattered. "Here, the key issue," he explained, jotting in his battered notebook. His pen scratched with the ease of a man who had written these words before. "HOAs only have authority over properties that voluntarily join, pay fees, sign contracts. You never did. That means they have no standing here. Period." I nodded, but my palms were still damp. "So, what happens when they keep pushing?" He gave me a faint smile. "That's what civil standby is for. My job is to make sure everyone remembers the law." And right on cue, Melanie showed up. She wasn't alone this time. 2 board members trailed behind her, one clutching a binder, the other a legal pad. They marched across the street, straight onto my property without knocking, like they owned the ground beneath their feet. My stomach flipped. I half expected them to shout, demand, argue, but they didn't get the chance. "Ma'am, step back to the public sidewalk," Deputy Blake said firmly before they were even halfway up my drive. His voice wasn't loud, it didn't have to be, it carried weight, real weight, the kind that stopped all 3 of them in their tracks. "This is a private managed community," Melanie snapped, gesturing at the homes around us like a queen defending her throne. I held my breath. Blake turned to face her fully, sliding his sunglasses down just enough that she could see his eyes. "No, ma'am. HOAs are voluntary associations, not private rulers. You do not have jurisdiction over properties that never consented. Any further attempt to claim authority here could bring serious civil liability." Every word landed like a hammer on an anvil. Neighbors began drifting closer, drawn by the sound of authority. Phones came out, screens lit up. I could feel the air shift, tension tightening like a rope between us. Melanie's lips trembled, her knuckles white around that clipboard. The other board members looked less certain now, shifting uncomfortably, stealing glances at one another. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from grinning. The mighty HOA, pushed back to the sidewalk by one deputy and the weight of real law. "This isn't over," Melanie hissed, but it didn't have the same sharpness anymore. It sounded more like desperation. Deputy Blake finished his incident report with deliberate strokes, explaining each step to me as he wrote. "This creates an official record," he said. "If they push again, you're covered. The paper trail is clear. The law is on your side." I exhaled for what felt like the first time all week. But relief didn't last. That night, Rebecca came by with her laptop and more spreadsheets. Her face was pale, her tone grim. "They've been padding their waste tonnage reports," she said, pointing at figures highlighted in yellow. "They're counting non-member properties like yours. That rebate money, it depends on inflated numbers. If you're excluded, they lose thousands, maybe tens of thousands." Her words sank like stones in my gut. Fraud, organized, deliberate fraud. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as her numbers swam on the page. "So this was never about my trash bin," I muttered. "It was about money." Rebecca met my eyes. Desperate people do desperate things. If they've been overreporting for years, exposure could ruin them. And suddenly the fine, the signs, the harassment, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just neighborhood drama. It was a financial scheme teetering on collapse. And I was standing right in the middle of it. By the end of that week, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. Neighbors I'd waved at for years suddenly had questions. Not angry, not outright confrontational, just probing, like they'd already been briefed by someone else. The woman 3 houses down asked if everything was okay with your property, Rebecca told me one afternoon, flipping her notepad shut. A man walking his dog lingered at my driveway the next morning. "Hope this all works out with the neighborhood situation," he said, his tone casual. But the look in his eyes told me he'd already chosen a side. It was subtle but steady, like a quiet campaign spreading through the cul-de-sac. My stomach twisted every time I caught a neighbor's glance. Meline was getting to them, shaping the story, making me the villain. Then came the third tag. This one was slapped across my bin at an angle, bright yellow, glaring in the morning sun. I peeled it off with a tight jaw. Different lot number again. That made 3 slips, 3 violations, 3 different plots. None of them mine. It wasn't incompetence anymore, it was deliberate. I carried the slip inside, laid it next to the others on my kitchen table, and stared at them like evidence in a trial. Orange, pink, yellow, each one printed with the certainty of authority, each one wrong. I wrote the date across the top in thick black marker, photographed it from every angle, and added it to the growing file in my garage. The sound of the tape tearing as I secured it to the board echoed through the empty space, sharp and final. This wasn't about trash compliance anymore. It was harassment, targeted and systematic. That evening I called the non-emergency line again. My voice was steadier this time. I explained the pattern, the false property numbers, the persistence. The dispatcher listened carefully, then said words that made my skin prickle. "You're right to report this. This kind of mislabeling can be considered harassment. We'll log it officially." I hung up and sat at the porch table, staring out at the lake, relief mixed with something heavier, because now it wasn't just between me and Meline. The county had a file. The sheriff's office had a record. Rebecca came by just after sunset, her laptop under one arm, a stack of spreadsheets under the other. She dropped them on the table with a sigh, the papers fluttering in the evening breeze. "They're desperate," she said flatly, sliding her finger down a column of numbers. "Look here, if they can't count properties like yours, their rebate falls below the threshold. They lose money, big money." Her eyes met mine, steady and grim. This isn't neighbor drama anymore, this is fraud. The crickets sang in the background as we sat in silence, the weight of her words settling like stones in our chests. My mind kept replaying the deputy's voice from earlier that week. HOAs are voluntary associations, not rulers. And yet here I was being ruled, pushed, pressured, harassed because of money. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice low. "You know what worries me? People do reckless things when money's on the line. If they're willing to falsify reports, what else might they try?" I didn't answer, couldn't. The thought gnawed at me long after she left, her spreadsheets still spread across my table. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me sit up. Every sound of gravel shifting outside made me wonder if someone was creeping by to slap another false violation on my bin. By Monday, I'd had enough. I gathered every slip, every photo, every note, and stacked them in a folder so thick it barely closed. I sharpened 2 pencils, laid them neatly beside the stack like weapons for the coming battle. My kitchen table looked less like a home and more like a war room. The county inspector was scheduled to arrive Tuesday morning. I'd rehearsed what I'd say a dozen times in my head, packing the porch with the lake breeze tugging at my shirt. I imagined the inspector standing there, clipboard in hand, documenting every overreach, every slip, every detail. This time there would be no arguing, no bluff, no neighborly power plays. This time it would be official. I remember standing at the porch rail that night, looking at my not in HOA sign glowing faintly under the street lamp. For weeks, it had felt like a shield, but now it felt like a challenge. And I couldn't help but wonder, when the inspector arrived, when the truth was laid bare, what would Meline do? Because one thing was certain, people who feel cornered don't go quietly. The county inspector pulled up right on time. Tuesday morning, sunlight bouncing off his reflective vest, clipboard tucked under one arm, county badge gleaming on the other. He walked with the steady calm of someone who'd done this before, and my stomach finally eased a little just seeing him step onto the curb. "Morning, Mr. Evans," he said, offering a polite handshake. His grip was firm, his tone professional. "I'm here to document and verify jurisdiction. Let's start with your property line." He pulled out a laser measurer, snapping numbers with practiced precision, marking distances on his tablet. Every movement carried the weight of government authority. I leaned on the porch rail, heart thumping, watching him work with methodical care. The sound of the gate creaking open behind me made my shoulders stiffen. Deputy Blake had arrived for standby, his cruiser angled just right so every neighbor could see it parked at the curb. He gave me a nod, then stepped back, letting the inspector lead but making his presence unmistakably clear. "This won't take long," the inspector said, crouching to snap photos of the marker on my fence. "We'll issue a non-jurisdiction determination. HOA has no standing here." The words landed like thunder. Weeks of harassment, 3 violation slips, neighbors whispering, and now, finally, the county was about to stamp the truth in black and white. And then I saw her. Meline striding fast down the street, papers flapping in her hands, 2 board members trailing behind her like nervous shadows. Her face was pinched tight, eyes darting toward the inspector's clipboard. "This is going to destroy our rebate system," she shouted before she'd even reached the driveway. Her voice cracked, desperate, echoing down the quiet street. Neighbors began drifting closer, phones out, recording. The inspector straightened, calm but firm. "Ma'am, please stand back. This is an official county inspection." "You don't understand the consequences this will have for our community," she cried, almost breathless now. "If you take his property out of our waste tonnage count, everything collapses." The desperation in her tone chilled me. She wasn't fighting for aesthetics or compliance anymore. She was fighting for survival, for money. And then she lunged. In one motion, she snatched the yellow county order straight from the inspector's hands. The paper tore with a sharp, violent sound that echoed across the yard. Everyone froze. Even the birds went silent. I blinked, unable to process what I'd just seen. My mouth went dry. Did she just... The inspector's voice cut through the stunned silence. Calm, cold, unmistakably official. "Ma'am, you just committed misdemeanor interference with a government employee performing official duties. That is a crime." The words fell like a hammer blow. I turned toward Deputy Blake, expecting hesitation. But he was already jotting in his notebook, every movement steady, precise, deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority radiated from him like heat off the pavement. Neighbors gasped. Rebecca, who had hurried over at the noise, whispered, "She just crossed the line." Her face was pale, her hands gripping the edge of my porch rail like she couldn't believe what she'd witnessed. The inspector calmly retrieved his backup copies, posted a fresh order with thick yellow tape over the flimsy HOA notice, and photographed it in place. The county seal gleamed in the sun, unmistakable, undeniable. The symbolism hit me like a rush of air, bogus authority smothered beneath real law. Deputy Blake spoke clearly enough for every phone camera to capture. "This report, along with witness statements, will go directly to the county attorney's office. Interference with government duty is taken seriously. Meline's face crumpled. The two board members beside her stepped back, clearly realizing how far things had spiraled out of control. And I stood there, jaw clenched, watching the so-called queen of the cul-de-sac unravel in front of everyone. Her power had always been an illusion, but now it was shattered, torn apart by her own hands. Neighbors whispered, some shaking their heads, some lifting their phones higher. The tide was turning. The story Meline had been spreading, me as the troublemaker, the problem, was unraveling live in broad daylight. The inspector signed his order with deliberate strokes, explaining every step as if teaching a class. This notice voids all HOA claims against this property. Permanently, multiple copies will be filed with the county clerk. The snap of the tape against my siding was sharp, final. Justice, nailed down for everyone to see. For the first time in weeks, I let myself smile, just a little. But deep down, one thought gnawed at me. People who cross into criminal territory don't always stop when the paper trail catches them. Sometimes they double down. And judging by the look on Meline's face, I knew this wasn't the last move she'd make. The county order was still taped firm against my siding when the news broke. 48 hours after Meline ripped the first copy to shreds, the county attorney filed charges. Misdemeanor interference with a government employee in the performance of official duties. It was straightforward, documented, witnessed, recorded on half a dozen neighbor phones. There was no spinning it away. Deputy Blake stopped by that evening, his cruiser headlights washing across my porch as he walked up the steps with his steady gait. He explained the charges in simple, clipped sentences. The county attorney's office has everything they need: witnesses, physical evidence, video. It's airtight. Hearing that word, airtight, made me exhale for the first time in days. But then he added, just be ready. When people feel cornered, they don't always make rational decisions. His warning stayed with me long after he drove away. The neighborhood buzzed the next morning. Groups of neighbors gathered near mailboxes, heads bent, voices low. When I walked down the street, eyes followed me. Some guilty, some curious, some suddenly friendly. Word travels fast when authority steps in. Even folks who had been distant or skeptical before were starting to nod as I passed, the kind of nod that says, guess you weren't crazy after all. Rebecca stopped by mid-morning, spreadsheets in one hand, her phone in the other. She was glowing, not with joy but with vindication. They can't bury this anymore, she said, sliding her laptop onto my porch table. The county order is public record, everyone can see it, and once the charges against Meline hit the docket, it'll be official. She tapped her screen, showing me a message thread from one of her accounting contacts. Their legal counsel is already scrambling. They know the insurance carrier is reviewing liability coverage. If the board can't protect itself, they're personally exposed. Financially, legally, everything. The words made me sit back hard in my chair. For weeks, I'd thought this was about me, my trash bin, my property. But now, the ripple was spreading wider. The HOA board itself was trembling under the weight of what Meline had dragged them into. By evening, the emergency meeting was underway in the clubhouse down the road. I didn't go, but half the neighborhood did. Later, Rebecca told me how it went. Tempers were high, she said, eyes wide. Board members yelling at each other, accusing Meline of overstepping, dragging them into legal liability. One even threatened to resign on the spot. And then came the hammer, a vote stripping Meline of her authority. Within 48 hours of being charged, the woman who strutted around with a clipboard, the self-appointed sheriff of the cul-de-sac, was ousted from power. Neighbors who'd once backed her started to distance themselves fast, whispering that they never agreed with how she handled things. The same people who had questioned me a week before were now crossing the street to say, guess you were right all along. It felt satisfying, but it also felt hollow, because behind the gossip and the shifting alliances there was something deeper, fear. Rebecca dropped more papers on my table the next day, highlighting figures in yellow. The fraud isn't just a mistake, it's systematic. Multiple quarters, multiple properties. If the county digs, they'll find everything. And they were digging. The inspector's report had already triggered automatic notification to the state HOA Oversight Board. By Thursday, a notice went up on the community bulletin, formal state investigation pending. The word sent a ripple through the neighborhood. Conversations at mailboxes turned sharp. People who'd once defended the HOA began asking questions. Not just about me, but about all the fees, the fines, the rebates. For the first time, it wasn't me under the microscope. It was them. I stood at the porch railing that night, watching the last of the daylight bleed into the lake. My sign, not an HOA, glinted in the orange glow of the streetlight. For weeks, it had been mocked, dismissed, ridiculed. Now neighbors paused when they walked by, eyes lingering on it like it carried new weight. Justice had started to tilt in my direction. But Rebecca's words kept echoing in my mind. Desperate people don't always stop when the paper trail catches them. Sometimes they escalate. And deep down, I knew Melanie wasn't finished. Charged, stripped of power, humiliated in front of the whole neighborhood, people like her didn't fade quietly into the background. No, people like her went down swinging. And I had the uneasy feeling the real storm hadn't even hit yet. The notice went up on the community board Thursday morning, taped in crisp white paper with the state seal at the top. Formal state investigation initiated. Review of financial irregularities and jurisdictional conduct. The words stopped people in their tracks. I watched from my porch as neighbors slowed, leaned in to read, then stepped back shaking their heads. Some took photos, others muttered under their breath. The tide had turned completely. For weeks I had been the one whispered about, the supposed troublemaker. But now the whispers circled the board itself. The HOA, once so smug in its control, was under the microscope of state auditors with subpoena power and no patience for games. Rebecca came by that afternoon, her arms full of folders and her laptop already humming before she even sat down. "It's worse than we thought," she said, scrolling through spreadsheets she'd pulled from public records. "They've been counting non-member properties for years, padding their waste tonnage to inflate rebates. It's not sloppy bookkeeping, it's deliberate." She clicked through charts, each line of numbers exposing another layer of fraud. "See this column? They claimed waste from houses outside their boundaries, quarter after quarter. They used inflated totals to qualify for higher rebates." The math was undeniable, and the implications were staggering. "This isn't neighbor drama anymore," she said, her voice low. "This is fraud against the county, maybe even the state." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, my pulse thudding in my ears. What had started with a $25 trash fine was now unraveling into something that could collapse the entire HOA. And then came the news I wasn't expecting. The state board had demanded a full audit. Every report, every rebate, every signature, Melanie's name was all over them. That night, as the crickets sang and the lake lapped softly against the shore, I couldn't shake the image of her face when she tore that county order. Desperation. Fear. Rage. She hadn't been fighting me. She'd been fighting to protect a crumbling scheme. And people like her don't go quietly. Friday morning, the sound of gravel crunching snapped me out of my thoughts. Melanie was back. No clipboard this time. No board members trailing behind her. Just her, striding up my drive with a manic energy that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You don't know what you've done," she shouted, her voice carrying across the street. Curtains twitched. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Phones appeared in hands. I stepped out onto the porch, heart racing, but kept my voice steady. "Melanie, you need to leave my property, now." Her eyes blazed. "You think you've won? You've destroyed everything, our rebate system, our credibility. Do you have any idea how much damage you've caused?" Behind her, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now watching with arms crossed, phones recording every word. Deputy Blake's cruiser pulled up within minutes, his calm presence instantly cutting through the tension. He stepped out, hand resting lightly on his belt, and addressed her with measured authority. "Ma'am, you're trespassing. Step back to the sidewalk." But she didn't move, her eyes locked on me, wild and desperate. "You ruined us." It was the moment everyone in the neighborhood finally saw what I had known for weeks. This wasn't about trash cans or property aesthetics. It was about power, money, fraud, and Meline's grip on all of it had just snapped. Deputy Blake repeated his command, firmer this time. Slowly, reluctantly, she backed away, retreating to the sidewalk as murmurs spread through the crowd. He leaned toward me then, his voice low. "It's escalating, document everything, and keep your doors locked." That night, as I filed the latest incident into my growing folder, I felt a mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. The state was involved now. The fraud was exposed. The paper trail was airtight. But Rebecca's warning echoed in my head. Desperate people escalate. And as much as the legal process was closing in, I couldn't shake the fear that Meline wasn't finished. Not yet. The state audit came down like a storm. Within a week of the notice going up on the community board, investigators were knocking on doors, requesting documents, pulling every report the HOA had filed over the past 5 years. Clipboards, laptops, county seals. It was all official, all business. Neighbors whispered about subpoenas, about accountants combing through files in the clubhouse, about board members being called in one by one to answer questions. The same board that had strutted around with smug authority now moved like shadows, their confidence stripped away. And at the center of every report, every inflated number, every forged figure, was Meline's signature. I watched the unraveling from my porch, the lake shimmering in the late summer heat. My not an HOA sign glinted in the sun, no longer a joke, no longer dismissed. It had become a line in the sand, a truth no one could deny anymore. Rebecca came by almost daily, her folders now thicker than mine. She grinned, but it was a weary grin. "They're cooked," she said, tapping the highlighted numbers with her pen. "The state's found quarter after quarter of inflated tonnage. They can prove intent. This isn't just mismanagement, it's fraud." The word hung in the air like a final verdict. Fraud. By the end of the month, the HOA board voted to dissolve. Insurance dropped them. The rebate program was frozen. State officials announced civil penalties that would follow certain members personally. And Meline. She was removed in disgrace. Criminal charges for interference. Civil liability for harassment. Her name blackened in county records that couldn't be scrubbed or spun away. I saw her once after it all collapsed. She was walking down the opposite side of the street, shoulders hunched, avoiding every glance. No clipboard. No sharp heels striking pavement, just a woman stripped of the power she'd clung to like armor. Neighbors who had once rallied behind her now crossed the street to avoid her. Conversations quieted when she walked by. The queen of the cul-de-sac had become a ghost in her own kingdom. Meanwhile, the county sent me a letter, embossed seal at the top, case closed. HOA abuse documented and resolved. I read the line twice, then 3 times, letting it sink in. I filed it into the thick folder that had grown from a single orange violation slip to a war chest of evidence. Then I closed the drawer and let out a long, heavy breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. The lake was calm that evening, the breeze soft against my porch. Rebecca joined me with 2 cups of coffee, her spreadsheets finally set aside. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the faint lap of water and the occasional croak of a frog. "Feels different now," she said quietly. "Yeah," I replied, my eyes on the yellow county notice still taped firm to my siding. Like the air's finally clear. The neighborhood had shifted, too. People who once eyed me with suspicion now stopped to chat. Some apologized awkwardly, saying they hadn't known the full story. Others simply nodded, a quiet respect in their faces. For the first time in months, the cul-de-sac felt like a community again. But the lesson ran deeper than just my street. Sometimes power is an illusion. A clipboard, a title, a loud voice. None of it matters when the law draws a hard boundary. Sometimes the people who shout the loudest are the ones standing on the weakest ground. And sometimes the smallest stand, a single sign, a single refusal to pay a bogus fine, can ripple outward and expose fraud that's been hiding in plain sight for years. I thought back to that first morning, the creak of my trash bin lid, the orange slip flapping in the breeze, how close I'd been to just paying it and moving on. If I had, none of this would have come to light. 2 papers told the whole story in the end. 1 bogus ticket torn down and filed away, and 1 county order taped firm for all to see. 1 sign staked into my fence, declaring not an HOA. And 1 woman, once convinced she ruled the block, brought down by the very law she tried to ignore. I still feel a mix of anger and relief when I think about it, but mostly I feel a quiet kind of pride. Because sometimes dignity isn't about shouting louder or pushing harder. Sometimes it's about standing your ground, knowing the law, and refusing to be intimidated. And maybe the real lesson is simple. If you don't draw the line, someone else will cross it for you. So guard your peace, guard your yard. Because you never know when someone with a clipboard might decide your driveway belongs to them. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.